Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you are listening to The Sounds of Film. And on today's edition of the program, we are spotlighting the powerful new documentary Slumlord Millionaire, winner of the Audience Award at DOC NYC. Directed by Steph Ching and Ellen Martinez, the film follows courageous tenants, activists, and attorneys fighting corrupt landlords and unchecked gentrification in New York City. Through intimate stories, Slumlord Millionaires exposes the human toll of a rigged housing system where the basic right to a safe home is under siege. Thank you very much for joining us on The Sounds of Film.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I love this movie. It's very provocative. What inspired the two of you to make this film about tenant rights and housing justice?
Yeah, so we have been longtime New Yorkers. We've both lived here, close to 20 years now. And I think everyone who lives in New York has had their own experience or has talked to someone who has experienced some form of, bad landlord, raising rents, construction right outside their building, rampant gentrification and development. So, it was something that was just very present in our everyday life. So we wanted to explore that a little bit more. And then we started hearing more about tenants' rights um, and landlord harassment. So that's kind of where our entry point was, kind of following these more traditional stories about tenants organizing and forming tenants unions to fight back against bad landlords. But as we started digging deeper, we started to see more of the systemic issues that are part of housing justice crisis in the city.
And what would you say is the number one issue facing people today?
Well, probably the most widespread is just typical landlord harassment. I mean, we follow one family in the film that has been in a legal battle with their landlord for 15 years, and she does things deliberately to try to make them have just try to make their apartment so uninhabitable that they are forced to move out. So things she would do is just turn off the heat and gas deliberately in the winter, so they're freezing cold in their own apartment. Sometimes she would even just bang on the door and harass them and try and enter the home uninvited without permission, which is illegal. And also things like ignoring repairs, ignoring a mold infestation. So these are things that I mean we've heard anecdotally from a lot of people, our friends, even throughout the city. But I think that's probably the most widespread.
I was,
Yeah, I would also,
y-
oh, I'm
yeah, I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I would also add that the rising cost of rent is something that is affecting everyone in the city. It doesn't have to be rent stabilized tenants. All across the city, rents are increasing at a really drastic number. And the city is really just not becoming affordable anymore. And that's something that, we feel is um, really having a negative impact on the character of New York City. New York has always been a place that was for everyone, people of all different backgrounds. My family came to the US in the 1960s, and the first place they landed was New York City. And, they found community in Chinatown, which is where they could find, folks who spoke the same language, the foods that they were used to. So it's always been a place for people from all different places. But with the unaffordability, it's quickly becoming a place just for the wealthy. And that is really something that is erasing a lot of the character of the neighborhoods that have been here for a really long time.
I do a lot of interviews with documentary filmmakers, and I talk to a lot of artists, filmmakers, painters, musicians, and lots of them have stories about how New York City used to be a place that attracted people in the arts as well as people in other job fields because it was inexpensive at one point, not too long ago.
Right.
And, and your film does a really good point of giving us the data about just how expensive it is to live in New York City these days. It really is a place just for the rich. Like,
Mhm.
just for those people that are unfamiliar, like, what are some of the rents that one would expect today if one went looking for an apartment in New York City today, an average apartment, nothing fancy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a study done by the New York Times just this week that said that a studio in Manhattan is about 3,000 over $3,000 a month,
Wow.
which is ridiculous for a studio. So I mean, you can even imagine if you're trying to have a family, need multiple bedrooms. I mean, it just goes up from there. And I think at the time of filming, the median rent in Manhattan was $5,000 a month.
Yeah. And then you put that against the median income that folks have. With the median income, you know, the average person can afford maybe $1,500 a month. So you need at least two people to live in a studio, which it's not built for that. And and that's market rate. And then if you look at rent stabilized buildings, a lot of rent stabilized tenants, they're still paying, $1,500, $2,000 for an apartment. So it's not it's happening all across the board.
There's a lot of issues raised in this movie, and I think some people will agree with the side I think that you take in this film, and maybe there's a couple issues that maybe people will have some disagreement. But let's start with some of the ones that just seem to be just outrageously terrible. You mentioned it before, but I was unaware because I do not live in New York City. I had heard stuff, but I was unaware that there's these tactics being used to drive people out of apartments by harassing them. You gave us some of the examples, but can you tell about the family who's portrayed in this movie and what was actually done to them through the years?
Sure. So the film, one of the four stories in the film follows the Bravo family, a family of five in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and they have lived in their building for, I think, over a decade. And this new owner took over, and her intention was to try to drive them out of the apartment so that she could flip it from rent stabilization to market rate. So rent stabilization is one of the last things keeping some apartments affordable in the city, and there are regulations about, like, if someone at a rent stabilized apartment wants to renew their lease, they have to, if they haven't if they've abided by the lease in general, they do have to renew it for them. So that's one of the reasons that she wanted to force them out. And yeah, something she would do is she would deliberately turn off the heat and hot water in the winter, so they would have to boil water to bathe. There were actually children in the apartment, and she ignored this big mold infestation that grew in the bathroom, and that caused the children to have asthma, like pretty severe asthma. And this family was able to actually join up with a local community group and Neighbors Helping Neighbors to help organize and pass the Asthma Free Housing Act, which is now law in New York State, where if there is a mold infestation or something affecting young children, the landlord legally does have to fix it. So they were really like pushing the landlord and trying to fight back. But when they fought back, she kind of stepped up the tactics. So that's when she would come to the apartment, trying to threaten to call the police, come in yelling and screaming at them. And it really reached a level where they were able to take her to the Human Rights Commission and file a case against her because it became that extreme.
That's amazing. And one of the great things about this movie is you don't just show the problems, but you show people who are fighting back and have found different ways through the legal system to argue their cases. One of the issues that's also raised in this film, which is just frightening to me, which I knew a little bit about, but I bet a lot of our listeners don't know about, is this idea of deed theft.
Yeah.
Somebody could own a piece of property in the city and strike into some kind of agreement with someone. Maybe you could explain the situation, but then through the process, they end up losing their entire piece of property, and it's all sort of legal, although it seems like it should be illegal. Can you explain what deed theft is?
Right. Yeah, that was something that was pretty new to us as well. I mean, it was something that we had sort of vaguely heard about on the news. Sometimes, they would report it and you think it's a one-off thing, but it's actually a pretty big epidemic, especially in Brooklyn and Queens, and particularly in Black neighborhoods, historically Black neighborhoods. But basically, what happens is someone can um, be the outright owner to a home, and someone else can scam them out of the deed to their home. And this is done in so many different tactics. These are very sophisticated and organized crimes that happen. Um, so a lot of times this happens with, forged documents. In New York City, you can actually just go to the registry and register a deed, and they won't check if that piece of documentation is real. So it can look like a real document. It can have like fake notarized signatures on it, and they'll just file that, and then that goes into record. So then later, someone can claim, "Oh well, this deed exists. I own this building," which is one of the more extreme examples. But a lot of times this happens, in a refinance or in the case of Janina in our film, she actually was looking to expand her building. So she had partnered with these developers who, they went into business together, and through creating an LLC, they scammed her out of her home. So a lot of times it's through tons of paperwork. It's a long drawn out process where these fraudsters will gain the trust of the homeowner and, scam them out of their home and kind of make you think that they're working on your side and, that you're doing something together. So that was something that was really eye opening to us. And the fact that it's happening in um, specifically Black neighborhoods was something that also we thought was just really emblematic of a lot of the systemic racism that's happening in this city and in this country, and kind of how this country and city workers formed. So, we really thought that was important to share. And then one last thing about that, I will add is I think a lot of folks, when they hear about deed theft, they think a lot of the blame goes on to the victim. A lot of it is, oh, well, you didn't, read the documents correctly, or, a lot of times when it's reported, it's, an elderly homeowner who may not have access to the lawyers or anything. But Janina, I mean, she's super well educated, had owned her home for years, had bought her home. She didn't inherit it. And she was still scammed out of it. So that was something that we really wanted to show, is that this unfortunately can happen to anyone, and that these fraudsters are very um, kind of just blatantly targeting folks of a certain neighborhood and background, and it doesn't matter kind of your own education or sophistication level. So yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you would think that because it's just so blatantly taking advantage of someone, that at least if you found it possible to take it to court, that you would find some justice. But one of the most depressing parts of this movie to me was the idea that many people who do bring their cases to court find out that the whole system is really sort of rigged against them, that the
Mhm.
judges are not necessarily just going to use common sense and say, "Oh, I see what happened here." It's not really that likely necessarily that one is going to be able to get their home back, is it?
No, I mean there's really not enough penalties against this, and also it is like Steph said, it's racial. I mean, people are saying this is a new form of redlining, that that people don't want certain Black people to own property, and this is shown by the court system of just being able to ignore the situation, and hopefully there is some legislation on the table right now to improve it. But I think just in general, most people don't even know this is something that exists. And the ways that they do it are so extreme and almost unbelievable. I mean, just with Janina, the person who came with a fake, like a fake marshal to try to get her out of her house. They also brought attack dogs. They did all of these really extreme things to force her out of her home. And they have all these lawyers, a lot of financing, a lot of money to make the legal paperwork really complicated. And anyone, if you're in a closing, say if you're buying a house and there's a stack of paperwork in front of you, you're not going to read every one of those documents. You're going to trust your lawyer to do that. And if the lawyer is in on the scam, like you really have no shot. So there absolutely needs to be much more accountability for these perpetrators.
Yeah, you make the point in the film that there's one story you mentioned where someone was at a closing or some kind of
Mhm.
transaction, and there were all these lawyers there, but one found out later on that they weren't even all lawyers. I mean, I
Right.
just can't believe something like that can actually happen. How does that happen?
I mean, I think that one of the biggest things is that these these crimes aren't being prosecuted to the level that they should be. You know, one reason for that is that they do tend to be harder to prosecute in the courts. Part of it is that a lot of these perpetrators are very lawyered up. They know the law like the back of their hand. They don't follow the law, but they know it, so they know how to get
Mm,
around the system.
right.
Another is, they're in it for the long game too. So a lot of times, folks won't even know that they've lost their home until years later. Like the paperwork has happened, and then years go by, and then the fraudster comes and says, "Oh, I own your home," and then when the homeowner tries to take them to court, the courts are like, oh, well, the statute of limitations has already expired because this crime happened X amount of years ago. So all of this is kind of in the calculation of when these perpetrators begin the crime. And, sometimes they are caught, but, if they're stealing 100 houses, but they only get caught for, a handful of them, they just look at that as the cost of doing business. The punishments for the crime are usually, paying a fine or paying back some of the money to the homeowner. So it's not really any loss to these people, whereas the homeowner is someone who's losing their entire home. It's really affecting their family and their future. So the risk is a lot different. And there's a huge imbalance right there.
Yeah, and we really wanted to include this story to show that it's not just, tenants versus landlords. It's even homeowners are being affected by this housing crisis. I mean, we're at a point now where if these rents are going to keep being the hot market that it is, and these prices are going to rise so much, some corrupt developers are now looking to actually steal people's homes to get more real estate to be able to sell these brownstones for millions of dollars.
It's absolutely crazy. All right, so those things just seem obviously wrong. Now, when you're talking about the fact that New York City has become too expensive, everyone can see that. But in terms of what needs to be done, I think that's sometimes where people have different opinions. One argument to be made, but it's not really the emphasis of this film, is that the government needs to provide more public housing at a reasonable rate. But another issue is the issue of rent stabilization. And
Mhm.
that's when you get into the issue of, and I'm no big fan of some of these very powerful or rich landlords, but um, it's a business. They've invested in it. Why should, well, what is the argument that somebody who has a private business should be forced by the government to take um, less money for what the going market rate is? They don't do that in other businesses. Why should that be forced on landlords in the area of housing?
Yeah. Yeah, completely. I mean, I think like, not all apartments are rent stabilized. So just by owning a rent stabilized unit, you already know going in that you are kind of agreeing to participate in this system. And, I mean, the movie is called Slumlord Millionaire because we did choose to focus on the bad landlords. Of course, there are good landlords out there. And I think like the issue that you raised about who's responsible for affordable housing, like that's something that has come up in the elections, the upcoming election. I mean, that is something that's being debated now. And I think just in terms of the rent guidelines board situation, like that's also arriving now, like when everyone can decide how much the rent goes up in rent stabilized units. We showed in the film, landlords are able to testify there as well. So there is like a back and forth debate.
So, what was the original argument? I'm not an expert on the topic. Like, how did the idea of rent stabilization come about in terms of making landlords um, not able to raise the rent so that people could stay in their buildings at a reasonable rate?
I mean, I
Not
think this all, oh,
going, yeah.
all right. I think this all goes to affordability. And yes, New York City is one of the oldest cities in this country and has always had issues with housing and large populations living in a place. And a lot of these regulations started in the 70s, um, you know, when the landscape was very different for housing here. Um, so I think one of the bigger problems that we should be looking at is the types of housing that do exist in New York City, and what is affordable and what's not affordable. Um, so a lot of we're not saying like development all over is bad, but development should take into account folks who, you know, earn the median income or earn the average income and should be able to afford to live there. So a lot of these buildings that go up are luxury buildings. They're catered towards, you know, folks who can pay, I think, like $8,000 for an apartment, which is
Yeah.
to me is outrageous. So I think, I think it's really looking at kind of the other end of the spectrum and how extreme it goes. Because housing shouldn't be um, just to make money, right? Housing is a human right. Everyone should be able to have a place to live, and have a safe and sustainable place to live. So, we're not saying that, if you own like people should deal in real estate and all of that, but um, you know, that shouldn't be at the expense of housing for everyone.
It was always sort of a dream of mine. I live outside of New York City, and I love New York City. I
Yeah.
love going in to see film festivals and plays and shows and going to museums. Uh, Man, I wish I could have a place in New York City. Do I have a right to say, like, if I wanted to get an apartment or a condo, should I have the right to be able to get one at an affordable rate?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think again, this is what makes the city so great and so vibrant is people who come from different places who, you know, you have a variety of experiences in your neighborhood. If your neighborhood is just, people who live in these like vanilla boxes and are only there for a year or two, that's not really a community, right? So everyone does have a right to live here. And I think that's where affordability comes into play. Sure, okay, if you're someone who wants to pay, $5 million for a luxury apartment, great, but that shouldn't be the only type of apartment that exists or that's available for folks to live in.
Yeah, and one of the important points that I think that's made in the film is that the country and the city in particular has roots in different cultures growing in the cities. And you use Chinatown as an example. Um, we run the risk as these markets become overpriced of different cultures being run out of the system. Can you just tell
Right.
me a little bit about what you learned about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree. I mean, that is the risk of driving people out. And I think one of my favorite scenes in the film is it's halfway through the film. There's a group of community members speaking about just what these big skyscraper towers that are about to be built on the waterfront, how that's going to affect them. And it's, I think they say people come and they live in the towers, but then they need a babysitter, or they want someone to do their laundry, they want someone to clean their house. Like, where do you expect to get those people if you're driving everyone out of the city? I mean, you need to just have affordability for everyone. Also, like Steph said, like we were talking about earlier, I mean, that's what makes New York City great is there's people from all different cultures and all walks of life here. and we're really, in each other's face. Like we're all on the street, we all see each other. And if you make a neighborhood so unbelievably unaffordable, then that's not going to be New York.
I was thinking of the film The Hunger Games. It's
Hmm.
it's dystopian, but it seems like that's almost where we're at. Where in the capital, the city,
Right.
you have all the rich people, and then everybody else has to live in the other districts. Um, I mean, is that really where we're at? And is it going to just become more true as we're moving forward, or do you see some kind of hope?
I don't think we're there yet, hopefully. I think one thing that has been really encouraging working on this film has been meeting so many different activists and organizers who are, finding strength in community and being able to sort of chip away at the system in whatever way they can. And I think that is, as long as we have community, we still have that flavor of New York, and I think we can hold on to that for quite some time. But it does take a lot of organizing and strategy, and also understanding the system that exists, because the system exists in a certain way to benefit certain people, but also to perpetuate um, some of these issues. That's part of the reason also why that we wanted to showcase the political side of the story and how much real estate money actually goes into not just politics, but specifically local politics. And so all level of politics is kind of affected by real estate money. And if those are the folks who are influencing elections, and if their candidates are the ones who are in power, they're the ones who are able to write the laws that can, you know, um, benefit certain people and at the expense of others. So I think that's also, one of the reasons why we wanted to show kind of the interconnectedness of the politics and the regular people that live in the city.
Well, it's so complicated because in America, we're not purely a capitalistic society, but we're definitely capitalists. But there's also elements of socialism, and it's kind of a mixture. And I think this film really captures that debate very, very well. It raises a lot of good points. There's some things, like we talked about earlier, that are going on that are just almost criminal or are criminal
Mhm.
that need to be fixed. But definitely housing is something that needs a lot more thought. And you show some politicians who are trying to deal with it. We need more of those, obviously. I want to thank the two of you for coming on The Sounds of Film. This is a great movie. Where can people go to see this film or online to learn more about it?
Yeah, so we're going to have a week-long theatrical run starting this Friday at DCTV Firehouse Cinema in Manhattan. And that goes from June 6th to June 12th. And we're going to have a lot of the participants are going to be there for discussions after, some receptions. Cynthia Nixon is actually going to be a special guest at the Sunday night screening at 6 o'clock. And we hope people can make it out to that in person. And the next time to watch it will be on PBS in July.
Well, that's great. Is there a website or anything like that that you want to direct people to?
Yes, people can go to slumlordmillionairefilm.com or follow us on Instagram at slumlordmillionairefilm.
Well, congratulations on the success with the film festival, and I want to highly recommend this film to everybody. And thank you so much for raising awareness about this very important issue.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.